Love and Forgiveness. Chapter 1. The Past. In the gaslit streets of 1875 London, where horse-drawn carriages clattered over cobblestones and social status meant everything, the Harrisons and the Winters maintained a close friendship forged through years of shared experiences. James Harrison and Robert Winters had met at Oxford, where they shared dreams of entrepreneurship while studying law. Their wives, Mary and Sarah, found companionship in their shared experiences as young mothers navigating London's middle-class society. Their children, Marcus and Elena, grew up surrounded by the warmth of both families' frequent gatherings. Through their childhood years, they were inseparable friends, sharing books, games, and secrets. It wasn't until a summer evening in Marcus's 16th year, during one of their family's garden parties, that everything changed for him. As Elena played the pianoforte, her fingers dancing across the keys while the setting sun cast a golden glow through the window, Marcus felt his heart stutter with a sensation entirely different from their comfortable friendship. In that moment, watching her lost in the music, he realized he had fallen deeply in love with his childhood friend. The family's weekly gatherings were held in modestly furnished but meticulously maintained drawing rooms, where both the Harrisons and Winters maintained their respectable middle-class position with careful dignity. Marcus and Elena's fathers worked as solicitors in neighboring firms, their families sharing the same social circles and similar economic circumstances. Marcus noticed everything about Elena: the way she adjusted her lace cuffs when nervous, how her eyes sparkled at the mention of the season's grand balls, and the determined set of her jaw when she read about the latest fashions in Paris. Their family's weekly teas became both a joy and an agony for Marcus, each moment in her presence both treasured and torturous. Elena was well aware of Marcus's devotion. She saw it in the way he always ensured her tea was prepared exactly to her preference, how he remembered every detail of the novels she discussed, and the way his expression softened whenever she entered a room. She found his attention comforting, like a well-worn shawl she could wrap around herself when the world seemed cold. But comfort wasn't what Elena dreamed of during the long nights in her modest bedchamber. "I want more than just a respectable marriage," she confided to her mother one evening after another family gathering. "I want carriages with matched pairs, silk gowns from Worth in Paris, and invitations to Almack's. Marcus is dear to me, but he can't give me that life." Sarah Winters watched her daughter with worried eyes as she arranged her worn skirts. "There's more to life than material comforts, Elena. Love. Love doesn't pay for a box at the opera or a house in Mayfair," Elena interrupted, pacing restlessly. "I've watched you and Father pinch pennies my whole life, making do with last season's fashions and declining invitations because we couldn't afford new clothes. I won't live like that." It was at Lady Ashworth's ball, which Elena had managed to attend through a carefully cultivated friendship with the lady's companion, that she met Lord Richard Blackwood. His ancient title and vast estates made him everything she had dreamed of. He was 45 to her 20, sophisticated and immediately enchanted by Elena's beauty and calculated innocence. The truth of Lord Blackwood's marriage was common knowledge in society. His wife, Lady Margaret, had lived as an invalid at their country estate for years, leaving him to cut a dashing figure in London society. When he began sending Elena expensive gifts and taking her to exclusive events, she convinced herself that his marriage was merely a legal formality. The whispers about Elena's new position in society spread quickly. Marcus heard it from his mother, who delivered the news with gentle concern. "She's accepted Lord Blackwood's protection," Mary Harrison said softly, the euphemism bitter on her tongue. "He's setting her up in a house on Mount Street." Marcus spent that night in his study, alternating between rage and despair, his acceptance letter to study law at the Inns of Court forgotten amid his heartbreak. The reality of what Elena was becoming, a nobleman's mistress, a kept woman, threatened to destroy the pure image of love he had carried for so long. "She knows what she's choosing," his father told him, pouring a rare glass of brandy for his son. "Sometimes people must learn life's lessons at great cost." "I could have given her a respectable life," Marcus insisted, his voice rough with emotion. "I just needed time to establish my practice." James Harrison studied his son over his own glass. "Then use this pain. Let it drive you. Build something so magnificent that one day she'll understand what she sacrificed for a gilded cage." The words took root in Marcus's heart, transforming his anguish into iron determination. The next morning, he began reviewing his law books with new purpose. He would focus on commercial law and banking areas where he could build the kind of success that Elena craved. Not for her, he told himself, but to prove that he could have offered her more than a position as someone's mistress. Elena, meanwhile, floated through her days in a haze of luxury and excitement. Lord Blackwood installed her in a beautifully appointed house, complete with servants and a carriage at her disposal. When he suggested she move to his estate in Gloucestershire, away from London's prying eyes and gossip, she agreed without hesitation. The night before her departure, she attended one final dinner with the Harrisons and her parents. Marcus was notably absent, having cited pressing work at his chambers. Elena felt a twinge of something regret, perhaps, or shame, but pushed it aside. She was choosing the life she had always wanted, even if it came with sacrifices she didn't yet fully understand. As she embraced her parents' goodbye the next morning, her father held her longer than usual. "Remember who you are, my girl," he whispered. "And remember that true respectability can't be bought with someone else's coin." Elena smiled, kissed his cheek, and stepped into Lord Blackwood's luxurious carriage, her heart racing with anticipation for her new life. She didn't look back to see her mother dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, or notice the way her father's shoulders slumped as the carriage disappeared around the corner. In the years that followed, Marcus threw himself into his legal studies and early practice with single-minded focus. His colleagues noted his drive. His peers admired his determination, but few understood the wound that fueled his ambition. Every success, every step up the social ladder, was another stone in the wall he was building between himself and the memory of Elena Winters. As his practice grew, specializing in the complex legal needs of London's merchants and bankers, Marcus couldn't help but hear occasional whispers about Elena's situation. Lord Blackwood's visits to her house in Gloucestershire grew less frequent as months turned to years. In society, mistresses had no legal standing, no rights to support or protection. They existed in a precarious world of dependency, their futures balanced on the whims of their protectors. Marcus pushed these thoughts aside, focusing instead on the steady growth of his practice and his carefully planned expansion into banking ventures. Chapter 2. Rise and Fall. The 5 years following Elena's departure witnessed Marcus Harrison's transformation from a promising young solicitor into one of London's most formidable financial minds. His days began before dawn in his austere chambers, poring over contracts and investment proposals by gaslight. While his peers sought advancement through social connections at gentlemen's clubs, Marcus built his reputation on an almost uncanny ability to spot promising business ventures. His first major success came with the financing of the Northern Railway expansion. Where other investors saw only risk in the ambitious project to connect London's manufacturing districts, Marcus recognized an opportunity. He worked tirelessly to structure a financing arrangement that protected both the large institutional investors and the small shareholders, earning him respect across London's financial community. "Harrison has the touch," whispered the bankers at their private clubs. "Everything he touches turns to gold." They didn't see the lonely nights in his office, the meals missed, the social invitations declined. Success became his mistress, as demanding and alluring as any woman could be. The offices of Harrison and Associates grew from a modest set of rooms to occupy an entire building near the Bank of England. The brass nameplate gleamed in the London sun, and the steady stream of well-dressed clients testified to the firm's rising prominence. Marcus's father, coming to visit one afternoon, barely recognized the empire his son had built. "You've done more in 5 years than most men achieve in a lifetime," James Harrison remarked, running his hand along the mahogany paneling. "Though I wonder at what cost." Marcus merely nodded, his expression carefully neutral. He had trained himself not to think of Elena, but sometimes in the quiet moments between transactions and meetings, her memory would surface like a ghost. While Marcus climbed the ladder of success in London, Elena's life in Gloucestershire followed a very different path. The first months had been intoxicating. Lord Blackwood had installed her in a grand house with a full complement of servants. The rooms were decorated with the finest furnishings from London, the gardens meticulously maintained by a team of gardeners. She spent her days learning to manage a large household, directing the servants, and playing the role of mistress of a great estate, even if only in this secluded corner of Gloucestershire. Lord Blackwood's visits, though irregular, were occasions of excitement. He would arrive in his finest carriage, bearing gifts from London silk dresses, French perfumes, delicate jewelry. Elena convinced herself that this arrangement, though not entirely respectable, was a fair trade for the luxury she had always craved. "You're blooming here, my dear," he would say, watching her model her latest gowns, "like a hothouse flower." She didn't notice then how his compliments always carried a hint of ownership, as if she were indeed just another beautiful object he had acquired. The discovery of her pregnancy changed everything. When Elena shared the news, Lord Blackwood's warm facade cracked, revealing the cold calculation beneath. His visits became shorter, more perfunctory. The flow of gifts slowed to a trickle. Though he continued to maintain the household, his personal attention waned dramatically. The birth of Thomas should have been a joyous occasion, but Lord Blackwood's response set the tone for what was to come. He arrived 3 weeks after the birth, stayed for precisely 1 hour, and departed without so much as looking at the child. His only acknowledgment was a curt nod when Elena mentioned the name she had chosen. "I trust you understand that this development changes nothing about our arrangement," he said, as he prepared to leave. "The child is no concern of mine." Elena's world began to shrink. The local gentry, who had initially paid carefully orchestrated calls that skirted the boundaries of propriety, now found reasons to be elsewhere. Her letters to friends in London went unanswered. The servants, though respectful, maintained a careful distance that emphasized her isolation. Thomas grew into a beautiful child, with his father's golden curls and fine features, but Lord Blackwood never showed him the slightest interest. During his increasingly rare visits, he would act as if the child didn't exist, his eyes sliding past Thomas as if he were merely another piece of furniture. Elena devoted herself to her son, trying to fill their days with enough love and activity to mask their growing isolation. She taught him to read from her small collection of books, played piano for him in the evenings, and walked with him in the gardens that were now their only domain. If she sometimes cried at night, remembering the grand dreams that had led her here, Thomas never knew. News of Lady Margaret's illness came through the servants' gossip. Lord Blackwood's wife, long an invalid, had taken a sudden turn for the worse. Elena felt a complex mix of emotions at the news, guilt at her uncharitable hopes, fear of what changes might come, and a tiny flicker of possibility that perhaps, finally, her position might change for the better. Lady Margaret's death was swift, and the changes Elena had feared came even more quickly than she had imagined. Lady Winchester, a wealthy young widow with impeccable social connections, began to be mentioned in association with Lord Blackwood. The London papers spoke of their joint appearances at social events, of her gracious manners and suitable background. The end, when it came, was brutally swift. Lord Blackwood's steward arrived early one morning, his face set in rigid lines of disapproval. He delivered his message with cold efficiency. Elena was to leave immediately, taking only what she wore. A small purse of coins was placed on the table, a final gesture that barely qualified as charity. "Lord Blackwood wishes it to be known," the steward added with precise cruelty, "that he denies any connection to your child. There will be no further support or acknowledgement." Elena stood in stunned silence as the steward departed, leaving her world in ruins. The beautiful dresses in her wardrobe, the jewels in her cases, even Thomas's toys, all were to be left behind, as if to erase every trace of their existence from Lord Blackwood's life. She looked around the room that had been her home for 5 years, seeing now how illusory her position had always been. Every fine thing she had thought of as hers had merely been on loan, as temporary as Lord Blackwood's affections. The only real thing she possessed was her son's love, and the harsh wisdom earned through her fall from grace. Thomas, playing with his wooden soldiers on the floor, remained blissfully unaware of how completely their world had just changed. Elena gathered him into her arms, wrapping them both in a borrowed shawl. With nothing but the clothes they wore and the few coins in her purse, they walked away from the house that had been both haven and prison. In London, Marcus sat in his newly expanded offices, signing the papers that would establish the Harrison Banking Corporation. His clerk brought in the evening papers, their headlines proclaiming his latest triumph. Yet, as he sat alone in his study that night, the leather chairs and expensive furnishings seemed to mock him with their emptiness. Success, he was learning, was a poor companion for solitary evenings. Chapter 3. The Reunion. The journey from Gloucestershire to London had been a descent into hell. Elena's small purse of coins dwindled rapidly as she paid for the cheapest coaching fares and the most modest lodgings. Thomas, bewildered by their sudden departure and the dramatic change in circumstances, clung to her skirts and asked questions she couldn't answer. "Why can't we go home, Mama?" he asked, on their third night in a squalid inn, his small face pale with exhaustion. Elena smoothed his golden curls, so painfully reminiscent of his father, and whispered stories to help him sleep, while her own eyes remained wide with worry. In London, Elena's attempts to reconnect with her former friends met with polite but firm rejections. The few who received her at all did so with carefully controlled expressions, their discomfort obvious as they took in her travel-stained dress and the tired child at her side. "My dear Elena," Lady Catherine Ashford had said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "you must understand my position. With young daughters of my own to consider, well, one must be so careful about associations these days." The door had closed firmly behind them, leaving Elena and Thomas standing on the marble steps as the rain began to fall. Each rejection struck like a physical blow, but Elena pressed on, driven by desperation and the growing hunger she saw in Thomas's eyes. Their small remaining funds disappeared entirely within the first week. Elena sold what little jewelry she had salvaged, but the unscrupulous dealers in the East End offered mere pennies for pieces that had once cost Lord Blackwood hundreds of pounds. Soon they were reduced to sleeping in doorways and begging for scraps from market vendors. Thomas, once a healthy, rosy-cheeked child, grew thin and pale. His innocent questions about their circumstances became less frequent as he began to understand, with the terrible clarity of childhood, that something had gone fundamentally wrong with their world. "I'm hungry, Mama," he whispered one evening, as they huddled in the entrance of a closed shop, the rain streaming down around them. Elena held him close, feeling the sharpness of his ribs through his thin clothes, and made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks before. It was on a particularly bitter evening in October that Elena found herself standing outside the imposing townhouse in Berkeley Square that bore Marcus Harrison's name. The brass nameplate gleamed in the lamplight, and through the tall windows she could see the warm glow of a well-appointed study. Marcus himself was visible, seated at his desk, his dark hair slightly disheveled as he worked late into the night. Elena stood there for nearly an hour, Thomas's small hand in hers, gathering the courage to approach the door. The woman who had once rejected Marcus's humble love now faced the terrible irony of having to beg for his charity. The rain soaked through her thin shawl, and Thomas began to shiver uncontrollably. Finally, with no other choice remaining, Elena climbed the steps and pulled the bell. Marcus looked up from his papers at the sound, frowning slightly. It was nearly 10 o'clock, far too late for social calls. His butler, Wilson, appeared in the doorway of the study with a puzzled expression. "Sir, there's a woman at the door, with a child. She says she must speak with you urgently." Marcus's heart stopped. Something in Wilson's tone, in the careful way he said, "woman," sent a chill through him. He rose from his desk and walked to the front hall, his steps measured and deliberate. When he opened the door, the sight that greeted him nearly brought him to his knees. Elena stood on his doorstep, her once beautiful dress now little more than rags, her face gaunt with hunger and desperation. In her arms she held a small boy who looked up at Marcus with eyes that were unmistakably Lord Blackwood's. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. "I had nowhere else to go." For a moment they stood frozen in the doorway, the years between them collapsing like a house of cards. Marcus saw not the proud beauty who had rejected him, but a broken woman holding a hungry child. Yet beneath his shock and pity, he felt the old wound tear open again, as fresh and painful as the day she had left. "Please," Elena continued, her voice cracking, "just for tonight. Thomas is so cold, and I don't know what else to do." Marcus stepped aside wordlessly, gesturing for them to enter. Wilson appeared with towels and helped Elena remove her sodden shawl, while Thomas stared around the grand hallway with wide eyes. In the warmth of Marcus's study, with a fire crackling in the grate and hot tea warming their hands, Elena told her story. She spoke of Lord Blackwood's abandonment, of her parents' death, of the weeks of desperation that had brought her to his door. Her voice remained steady throughout, but Marcus could see the tremor in her hands as she lifted the teacup. "I was wrong," she said finally, her eyes fixed on the fire. "So terribly wrong about everything. I chose wealth over love, status over happiness, and I've paid the price for my foolishness. If you could find it in your heart to give me another chance, I swear I would spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of your forgiveness." Marcus listened in silence, his heart warring with his mind. The woman before him was not the Elena he had loved. That girl had been proud, ambitious, untouched by real hardship. This Elena was humbled, desperate, changed by suffering. Yet how could he trust that this transformation was real? How could he be certain that her words were born of genuine remorse and not merely the desperation of her circumstances? "I cannot," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I cannot risk it, Elena. You hurt me too deeply, and I've worked too hard to rebuild my life." Elena's face crumpled, but she nodded with dignity. "I understand," she whispered. "I had no right to expect. I'm grateful for your kindness in listening to me." Marcus arranged for them to spend the night in a respectable lodging house, providing enough money for several days' board. As he watched their carriage disappear into the rain-soaked streets, He felt as though he were tearing out his own heart. The next few days passed in a blur of torment for Marcus. He threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, but Elena's image haunted him. He told himself he had done the right thing, that he couldn't risk being hurt again. Yet doubt gnawed at him like a physical pain. On the fourth day, fate intervened. As Marcus's carriage turned a corner near the financial district, he spotted a familiar figure at a busy intersection. Elena stood there with Thomas, her hand extended to passers-by, her eyes dead and hollow. The proud woman, who had once commanded attention at society balls, was now reduced to begging for coins from strangers. Marcus ordered his driver to stop, his heart breaking at the sight. Thomas, so thin his clothes hung loose on his small frame, pressed close to his mother's side. Elena's face, once radiant with beauty and ambition, was now marked by despair and defeat. In that moment, Marcus realized that his love for Elena had never truly died. It had been buried beneath layers of hurt and pride, but it remained, as constant as his heartbeat. He couldn't save the girl she had been, but perhaps he could help the woman she had become. "Elena," he called softly as he approached. She looked up, and for a moment, hope flickered in her eyes before being replaced by shame. "Marcus, we were just—" "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. "We need to talk." Chapter 4. The Arrangement. Marcus led Elena and Thomas to a nearby tea room, one frequented by merchants and businessmen rather than the fashionable society she had once known. The proprietor, recognizing Marcus as a valued customer, quickly arranged a private alcove where they could speak without attracting attention. As Elena helped Thomas with his meal, the first proper food he had eaten in days, Marcus studied them both. The boy ate with the desperate hunger of someone who had learned not to take food for granted. While Elena barely touched her own plate, her attention focused entirely on ensuring her son's needs were met. "How long have you been on the streets?" Marcus asked quietly. Elena's cheeks flushed with shame. 3 weeks, she whispered. "I tried to find work, but no respectable household would employ a woman with a child, and no references. And the other kind of work." She shuddered, leaving the sentence unfinished. Marcus understood. For a woman in Elena's position, there were precious few options. The workhouse would separate her from Thomas, and the alternatives were too degrading to contemplate. Yet as he watched her tenderly wipe Thomas's face, he saw something that gave him pause, a fierce maternal love that had clearly sustained her through the worst of circumstances. "I have a proposition," he said slowly, his voice carefully measured. "It's not what you asked for, and it may not be what you hoped for, but it would provide you and Thomas with security." Elena looked up, wariness and hope warring in her eyes. "What kind of proposition?" Marcus drew a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to suggest would shock her. "You would come to live in my household, not as my wife, not as my guest, but as my concubine." The word hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Elena's face went pale, and she glanced around nervously to ensure no one had overheard. "Marcus, I don't understand. A concubine? That's an arrangement from ancient times. No one does it anymore." "Precisely," Marcus interrupted. "Which is why it serves my purposes. You would have a position in my household, but not one that society would recognize or respect. You would be cared for, protected, but you would have no legal rights, no security beyond my whim." Elena stared at him, trying to comprehend his meaning. "But why? Why would you want such an arrangement?" Marcus's expression hardened, and for a moment Elena saw the depth of the pain she had caused him. "Because I don't trust you," he said bluntly. I don't trust that your repentance is genuine, that your transformation is real. This arrangement would allow me to help you, and I find I cannot bear to see you suffer while protecting myself from further heartbreak." "You want to test me," Elena said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "I want to know if the woman before me is real, or if she's simply another performance designed to secure your comfort," Marcus replied. "As my concubine, you would have everything you need: food, shelter, clothing, security for Thomas. But you would also be at my complete mercy. I could dismiss you at any time, for any reason. You would have no recourse, no protection." Elena was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The arrangement Marcus proposed was both a salvation and a humiliation. She would be safe. Thomas would be cared for. But she would occupy a position that would make her an object of scorn in polite society. What would be expected of me?" she asked quietly. Marcus saw the fear in her eyes and felt a pang of something: guilt, perhaps, or regret. "You would manage my household, see to my comfort, act as hostess when required. Nothing more. I have no intention of— that is, this would be a concubinage in name only." The relief in Elena's expression was unmistakable. "And Thomas?" "Thomas would be raised as a member of my household. He would be educated, provided for, but he would not be my heir. He would always know that his security depends on my continued goodwill." Elena looked at her son, who was now drowsing against her shoulder, exhausted by the day's events. The choice before her was stark: accept Marcus's terms and live in comfortable bondage, or refuse and return to the streets with her child. "I accept," she said simply. "I have no choice but to accept." Marcus nodded, unsurprised by her answer. "Then we understand each other. You will move into my household tomorrow. Wilson will prepare rooms for you and Thomas in the servants' quarters." "No," Elena interrupted, then caught herself. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It's just that if I'm to be your concubine, even in name only, shouldn't I— that is, won't people expect?" Marcus considered this. She was right, of course. The arrangement would be more convincing if Elena occupied a position somewhere between servant and mistress of the house. "You're correct. You'll have rooms on the second floor, near my own chambers. But understand, this is for appearances only." The next morning, Elena and Thomas arrived at Marcus's townhouse with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Wilson, clearly disapproving but too well trained to voice his concerns, showed them to their new quarters. The rooms were beautifully appointed, with a sitting room, bedroom, and smaller chamber for Thomas. After weeks of sleeping in doorways, the luxury was almost overwhelming. "Mama, is this really ours?" Thomas asked, his eyes wide as he explored the room that would be his. "For now, my darling," Elena replied, smoothing his hair. "We must be very good and very grateful." That evening, Marcus introduced Elena to his household staff. The servants' reactions ranged from barely concealed shock to outright disapproval. Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper, sniffed audibly when Marcus announced Elena's position. "A concubine, sir?" she asked, her voice dripping with disapproval. "In this house?" "Yes, Mrs. Patterson," Marcus replied firmly. "Miss Winters will be managing the household from now on. You will extend to her the same respect you would show any lady of the house." The announcement created immediate tension. Elena found herself caught between the servants, who saw her as an interloper, and Marcus, who maintained a careful distance. Her position was ambiguous, not quite a servant, not quite a lady, but something uncomfortably in between. Word of the arrangement spread quickly through London society. Marcus's business associates were puzzled by his choice, while the ladies of his acquaintance were scandalized. At his club, the whispers followed him wherever he went. "Harrison's taken a concubine," he overheard one member saying to another. "Extraordinary thing to do in this day and age. The woman was Blackwood's mistress, you know. Threw her out when he remarried." "Peculiar business," came the reply. "Can't think why a man of his standing would burden himself with another man's leavings." Marcus endured the gossip with outward indifference, but inwardly he questioned his decision. Why had he chosen this path? Was it truly to test Elena's sincerity, or was it his way of punishing her for the pain she had caused him? Elena, meanwhile, threw herself into her new role with quiet determination. She managed the household efficiently, ensuring Marcus's comfort while making no demands on his time or attention. She was respectful to the servants, gentle with Thomas, and grateful for every small kindness. In the evenings, she would sit in her room, teaching Thomas his letters or mending his clothes, while Marcus worked in his study below. The house felt large and empty despite its occupants, filled with the weight of unspoken words and carefully maintained distances. "Are you happy, Mama?" Thomas asked one evening as she tucked him into bed. Elena paused, considering the question. Happy was not the word she would use. Safe, perhaps? Grateful, certainly. But happy? That seemed as distant as the stars outside their window. "I'm content, my darling," she said instead. "We have everything we need, and that's more than many people can say." As she closed Thomas's door and retired to her own room, Elena reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. She had begun as a merchant's daughter, with dreams of grandeur, become a nobleman's mistress, fallen to begging in the streets, and now found herself in the unprecedented position of being a concubine to the man whose love she had once scorned. The arrangement was working in its way. She and Thomas were safe, fed, housed. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in a kind of purgatory, not quite punishment, not quite redemption, but something suspended between the two. And Marcus, the man who had once loved her with such devotion, now treated her with polite indifference that was somehow more painful than anger would have been. She understood that this was her penance, and she accepted it willingly. But deep in her heart, she hoped that someday, somehow, she might find a way to earn not just Marcus's charity, but his forgiveness, and perhaps, if she dared to dream, his love once again. Chapter 5. The Path to Trust. The first months of Elena's residence in Marcus's household were marked by a careful dance of boundaries and expectations. She rose early each morning to oversee the servants' preparation of Marcus's breakfast, ensuring his coffee was precisely the temperature he preferred, and that the morning papers were arranged in the exact order he had grown accustomed to. These small attentions were her way of showing gratitude, though Marcus received them with polite indifference. Thomas adapted to their new circumstances with the resilience of childhood. His health improved rapidly under the care of proper meals and warm shelter, and his natural charm began to win over even the most resistant members of the household staff. Cook, initially disapproving of the boy's illegitimate status, found herself saving him special treats when she thought no one was looking. "He's got lovely manners for one so young," she confided to Mrs. Patterson. "Says please and thank you without being reminded, and never makes demands." Elena had taught her son well in the art of gratitude. She understood that their position in the household was precarious, dependent entirely on Marcus's continued tolerance. Every day was a test they could not afford to fail. Marcus, meanwhile, observed this domestic tableau with a mixture of emotions he struggled to understand. He had expected to feel satisfaction at Elena's reduced circumstances, some measure of revenge for the pain she had caused him. Instead, he found himself noting her genuine efforts to prove herself worthy of his protection. She never complained about her ambiguous position in the household, never asked for anything beyond what was necessary for Thomas's welfare. When the other servants whispered about her past, she bore their judgment with quiet dignity. When society ladies cut her dead During the few occasions she accompanied Marcus to public events, she maintained her composure with a grace that reminded him of the girl he had once loved. It was during the Christmas season of Elena's first year in his household that Marcus began to see cracks in his own carefully constructed indifference. Elena had asked his permission to decorate the house for the holidays, a request he granted with little thought. He returned from his offices one evening to find the townhouse transformed. Garlands of evergreen adorned the banisters, candles flickered in every window, and the scent of baking filled the air. In the drawing room, Elena knelt beside Thomas, helping him hang ornaments on a modest tree. The domestic scene struck Marcus with unexpected force. It was everything he had once dreamed of having with Elena, now playing out in a context he had never imagined. "Mr. Harrison," Elena said, rising quickly when she noticed him. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted Thomas to have a proper Christmas." "It's lovely," Marcus replied, surprised by the genuineness in his own voice. "You've done well." That evening, Marcus found himself lingering in the drawing room after dinner, watching Elena read to Thomas by the firelight. Her voice was soft and melodic as she brought the characters to life, and Thomas listened with rapt attention. When the boy's eyes began to droop with sleep, Elena carried him to his room with tender care. "He's a good boy," Marcus said when she returned. "He is," Elena agreed. "Despite everything that's happened, he's remained sweet and loving. I sometimes wonder if I deserve such a gift." Marcus studied her face in the firelight. The pride and ambition that had once defined her features had been replaced by something softer humility, perhaps, or wisdom born of suffering. "You've been a good mother to him." The compliment, small as it was, brought tears to Elena's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more to me than you know." As winter turned to spring, a subtle shift began to occur in the household dynamics. Elena's quiet competence had won over most of the servants, and even Mrs. Patterson began to show her grudging respect. More importantly, Marcus found himself seeking out Elena's opinion on household matters, then on other subjects entirely. "What do you think of the new railway proposal?" he asked one evening over dinner, a meal they had begun sharing at Elena's timid suggestion that it might seem more natural to any observers. Elena considered the question carefully. "I think it has merit, but the financing seems overly ambitious. Wouldn't it be wiser to plan for a more gradual expansion?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, surprised by the insight. "You've been reading the financial papers?" "I have," Elena admitted. "I wanted to understand your work better. I hope that wasn't presumptuous of me." It wasn't presumptuous. It was exactly the kind of intellectual companionship Marcus had always valued. He found himself looking forward to these dinner conversations, to Elena's thoughtful questions, and surprisingly astute observations about his business ventures. Elena, for her part, threw herself into becoming the woman she sensed Marcus needed. She studied his preferences, learned about his business interests, and gradually became an asset to his social obligations. When he entertained clients at home, she played the perfect hostess, charming, but not overly familiar, intelligent, but not threatening. The ambiguity of her position actually worked in their favor. Guests were never quite sure how to categorize her, so they treated her with cautious respect. "Your Miss Winters is quite remarkable," commented Sir William Ashford after a particularly successful dinner party. "Unusual arrangement you have there, but she certainly knows how to manage an evening." Marcus accepted such comments with neutral responses, but privately he felt a growing pride in Elena's accomplishments. She had transformed herself from a woman who had valued only external beauty and status into someone of genuine substance and capability. The first real test of their evolving relationship came when Elena fell seriously ill with pneumonia during her second winter in the house. Marcus found himself genuinely concerned for her welfare, visiting her sick room daily and insisting on the best medical care. When Thomas, frightened by his mother's condition, crept into Marcus's study in tears, Marcus found himself comforting the boy with a tenderness that surprised them both. "Will Mama be all right?" Thomas asked, his small hand clutching Marcus's sleeve. "Yes," Marcus assured him, realizing he truly meant it. "She's stronger than she appears. She'll recover." During Elena's convalescence, Marcus took personal responsibility for Thomas's care. He helped the boy with his lessons, read to him in the evenings, and answered his endless questions about the world of business and finance. To his surprise, Marcus discovered that he enjoyed the role of mentor and protector. When Elena finally recovered, she was deeply moved by the care both she and Thomas had received. "You didn't have to do all that," she said, as she thanked Marcus for his kindness. "Yes, I did," Marcus replied, and realized it was true. Somewhere along the way, Elena and Thomas had stopped being burdens he had taken on out of a mixture of pity and pride. They had become his responsibility, his household, his family in all but name. Elena sensed the change in Marcus's attitude and redoubled her efforts to prove herself worthy of his growing trust. She began to anticipate his needs before he expressed them, managing his social calendar with skill and ensuring his home was a refuge from the pressures of his business world. When he worked late, she would leave a light supper in his study. When he faced difficult negotiations, she offered quiet words of encouragement. "You're the most capable woman I've ever known," Marcus told her one evening after she had successfully managed a particularly challenging dinner party for his most important clients. Elena's breath caught at the compliment. "Do you really think so?" "I do," Marcus said, and meant it completely. "You've exceeded every expectation I had." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning neither quite dared to explore. Elena had indeed exceeded his expectations, but more than that, she had slowly and patiently rebuilt something Marcus had thought was permanently broken, his ability to trust her. As they stood in the drawing room that evening, the space between them seemed to crackle with possibility. For a moment, it seemed as though Marcus might say more, might bridge the careful distance he had maintained for nearly 2 years. But the moment passed, and they retired to their separate rooms, both knowing that something fundamental had shifted in their relationship, even if neither was quite ready to acknowledge it openly. In her room that night, Elena allowed herself to hope for the first time since arriving at Marcus's house. She had earned his respect, perhaps even his affection. The question now was whether she could win back his love, and whether she deserved it after all the pain she had caused. Chapter 6. The Resolution. The turning point came on a quiet spring evening in Elena's 3rd year at Marcus's house. She had been tending to the garden, a hobby she had discovered during her time in Gloucestershire, and continued as a way to find peace in her new life. Marcus found her there, kneeling among the roses, her hands gentle as she pruned the delicate stems. "They're beautiful this year," he said, settling beside her on the garden bench. "They remind me that beautiful things can grow from difficult circumstances," Elena replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. With proper care and patience, Marcus studied her profile in the fading light. The years had changed her, deepening her beauty in ways that youth alone could never achieve. The desperate hunger for status and luxury had been replaced by something far more precious: contentment in simple pleasures and genuine appreciation for what she had been given. "Elena," he said softly, "I need to tell you something." She looked up, her eyes reflecting both hope and wariness. After 3 years of careful boundaries, any change in their routine felt momentous. "I've been thinking about our arrangement," Marcus continued, "about what it's become and what it might be." Elena's hands stilled on the pruning shears. "Have I displeased you in some way?" "Quite the opposite," Marcus said, reaching out to cover her hands with his own. "You've become everything I never dared to hope for. You've made this house a home, You've been a devoted mother to Thomas, and you've shown me a depth of character I'm ashamed to say, I once doubted you." Elena felt tears prick her eyes at his words. "Marcus, Let me finish," he said gently. "I told myself I was testing you, that I needed proof of your sincerity. But the truth is, I was punishing you, and perhaps punishing myself as well. I've watched you these past 3 years, seen your patience, your humility, your genuine transformation. You've more than proven yourself worthy of my respect and my trust." "What are you saying?" Elena whispered. Marcus stood and extended his hand to her. "I'm saying that I love you, Elena. Not the girl you were, but the woman you've become. And if you'll have me, truly have me, as your husband, I would be honored to call you my wife." Elena stared at him for a long moment, scarcely daring to believe what she was hearing. Then she placed her hand in his and rose to meet him. "I love you too," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've loved you for longer than I deserved to, longer than I had any right to. If you'll truly forgive me for the pain I caused you—" "There's nothing to forgive," Marcus interrupted, pulling her into his arms. "We're not the same people we were then. We've both learned and grown and suffered. What matters now is what we choose to build together." Their wedding, held 6 months later, was a modest affair by society's standards, but perfect in its intimacy. Elena wore a simple ivory silk gown, her only adornment a string of pearls that had belonged to Marcus's mother. Thomas, now 7 years old and filled with joy at the prospect of officially becoming Marcus's son, served as ring-bearer. The ceremony was attended by Marcus's business associates and the few friends who had stood by them, despite the unconventional nature of their relationship. James and Mary Harrison, now elderly but still devoted to their son, welcomed Elena back into the family with open hearts. "I always hoped you two would find your way back to each other," Mary Harrison confided to Elena after the ceremony. "Love like yours doesn't simply disappear, it just gets buried sometimes under pride and hurt." The early years of their marriage were filled with the quiet happiness of a love that had been tested and proved true. Marcus formally adopted Thomas, giving him the Harrison name and all the privileges that came with it. The boy flourished under his new father's guidance, showing an aptitude for numbers and business that delighted Marcus. "He has your mind for finance," Elena told Marcus one evening as they watched Thomas work through mathematical problems at the kitchen table. "And your charm," Marcus replied. "He'll be formidable when he's older." 2 years after their marriage, Elena gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. The baby was a perfect blend of both parents, with Elena's delicate features and Marcus's dark eyes. Thomas was utterly devoted to his little sister, taking his role as big brother with adorable seriousness. "She's so small," he marveled, carefully holding her tiny hand. "How will she ever be big enough to help Papa with his business?" "Give her time," Elena laughed. "She'll surprise us all, I'm sure." Their son Michael followed 2 years later, completing their family. Marcus often marveled at the domestic happiness that filled his once empty house. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the halls, and Elena's presence brought warmth to every room. Marcus's business continued to flourish, but he learned to balance his ambition with his responsibilities as a husband and father. He made time for family dinners, for bedtime stories, for the 1,000 small moments that make a house a home. Elena, for her part, found fulfillment in roles she had never imagined valuing. She took pride in managing their household, in raising their children, in being Marcus's partner in both his professional and personal life. The dreams of grandeur that had once consumed her seemed laughably shallow compared to the deep satisfaction she found in their daily life together. In their later years, as Marcus and Elena watched their grandchildren play in the same garden where he had first proposed, they often reflected on the winding path that had brought them together. The young people, they had been proud, ambitious, wounded, seemed like characters from another story. If someone had told me then that we would end up here, Elena mused, her hair now silver but her eyes still bright, I would never have believed it. Perhaps that's as it should be, Marcus replied, taking her hand with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. Some gifts are too precious to be imagined. They have to be lived. Their story became a legend of sorts in their social circle, proof that love could triumph over pride, that redemption was possible for those willing to do the hard work of change, and that the greatest happiness often came not from having everything one thought they wanted, but from learning to treasure what truly mattered. As evening fell over their garden, and their children called their own families in for dinner, Marcus and Elena Harrison sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the love they had fought so hard to build and preserve. They had learned that the price of redemption was high, but the reward, a life filled with genuine love and lasting happiness, was beyond all measure.